One of the most important albums for the Britpop movement in the 90s was actually released in 1990, several years ahead of that movement exploding into the mainstream. And that album was the self-titled debut release from Liverpool four-piece The La's. This album was so influential to the Britpop movement that Noel Gallagher himself said that his mission was to finish what The La's had started. If the Smiths and the Stone Roses were the instigators of what would become Britpop, The La's were its first true incarnation. The album is outstanding. It was and is hugely influential worldwide, and it has gone down in history as an absolute British indie classic. Anyone who's seen my top 10 British albums of the 90s video will know I ranked this album second only to Watch the Story Morning Glory. And yet, from the day it was released right up to the present time, frontman Lee Mavers has disowned it, written it off, and actively encouraged people anywhere and everywhere not to buy it or listen to it. The album was recorded 3 times in its entirety over countless studios all over the UK, and the story of its making is one of the strangest in all of Britpop legend. So today I want to tell you the story of Lee Mavers and the La's, and leave it up to you to decide, is this album the work of a genius, a madman, or both? The La's was founded by the amusingly named Mike Badger in 1983 after he had a dream about the name. The name The La's itself was supposed to be a double meaning. It was the 6th note from the musical solfege system, which is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and it was also the Liverpool slang word for lad. The first song released under The La's name was called I Don't Like Hanging Around, and it was just Mike being backed by another band. Around that time, Mike Badger first met future frontman Lee Mavers at an art exhibition in Manchester. He recalls the first time he saw Lee like this. I went to see an exhibition with a friend, and in the foyer there was this guy sitting in the corner in a suit and hat, sketching in his notebook and going, fucking shit, fucking shit, fucking shit. I asked if I could see some of his sketches and he said sure, and told me that he was actually a musician. I told him I was too, and he replied, I know, I'm psychic. After bumping into Lee several times more, Badger made the decision to invite Lee to join the La's, and he immediately accepted. Lee Mavers originally joined on guitar with Mike Badger as primary songwriter and frontman. After recording some demos, rehearsing and developing their sound, the La's started gigging in February 1986, and shortly after, Lee Mavers began bringing 1 or 2 songs that he had written to the band.
So at what stage, Lee, did you think, hey, this is a bit more than just a few lads having a laugh sort of thing, that we can make more of it, if you like? Was there a stage?
The only stage when I realised that was like when I wrote my first song. Basically, I knew how good it was and all that. And if I could do that, I could do more. And I knew that it had to get to people, and somehow it would.
And I remember
and
my
that's the light at the end of the
like...
tunnel, you see.
Mike Badger welcomed his contributions, and they switched to a kind of frontman sharing system where Mike would sing the songs he had written and Lee would sing the songs he had written. However, there was this strange permanent arrangement in the La's where the 2 main musicians in the band were fixed and the other 2 musicians were just constantly changing. And so, in June of 1986, Mavers and Badger had lost their bass player. And so Badger joined a scheme being run by Liverpool Council for unemployed musicians, and there he met a 17-year-old lad by the name of John Power. Power was invited for a jam, and despite having never played bass guitar before, he was invited to join the band. John Power said this, "I can't explain it to you. If you believe in the future and something that's brewing in you, then finding people like that is just great. I wasn't a player when I joined the band. I was just a lad with enthusiasm. They recognised it in my eyes. I had everything apart from the fact that I'd never played bass in my life.
Yeah, the world is the main. You know, I want the whole world to be singing a Lars song like one day. You know, I can quite easily, I can see it like without being. I'm not big head. I'm not confidence.
No, it sounds as though we're speaking
Sounds
too
like we
soon,
are big
but we know
heads.
what's going to happen.
It's just belief, really, like from there.
Lee Mavers put it like this. He was just a little 17-year-old whippersnapper, a kid, but if I told him to play something, he'd do it. And along with John Power came, for the first time, a following in the form of his enormous crowd of mates. Once John Power had joined, the gigs came thick and fast, and by December 1986, the band were on the rise. However, tension had now begun to develop between Mavers and Badger as they started jockeying for position for who would be the leader of what was initially Badger's band. And during the setup for one of these December gigs, there was a huge row between Mavers and Badger. Lee Mavers said to Mike Badger, "As for you, you're going on Monday." Mike replied, "You're not going to get that chance because I'm leaving now." And Mike quit the band, never to return. Lee was now the sole frontman of the Lars. And from that point on, the Lars entered the phase of their life that they are the most remembered for, that of John Power and Lee Mavers being the two permanent members, while the other two members of the band just constantly, hilariously changed at a rate faster than Spinal Tap.
No, I don't know. We started in 1986, me and Lee. Well, we were always ready to go, but I met Lee in 86, like, through a lad called Mike Badger, who had a thing called the Lars, but he went his own way, and we're still, you know, going, and we kept the name, like.
At first, everything seemed positive and promising under Mavers' leadership. The new incarnation of the Lars continued to gig, supporting other acts, and their following continued to grow in Liverpool.
We were selling ourselves before anyone heard of us. You know, we were putting our own posters
We
up.
didn't even have any musical instruments. We used to just jump up on stage like
Borrow,
and just
like.
borrow. You know, the band that was on, like, lend your guitars, get up there.
No,
and
if
do
we
it.
could play, we would. If there was a
You know,
5-minute
we just
gap.
like, come on, you're playing as well, kind of thing, because we didn't have a full lineup. Just anyone, like.
I think we used to do everyone's head in, actually, because everywhere you went, we were around, like, playing or sticking our posters up. So either you liked us or you didn't, but we were there. People knew of us. You couldn't ignore it because there was posters everywhere, and we were playing
It was
everywhere.
once a
like.
time, like, whatever party was on, we were there playing, like, you just couldn't get away from us.
They recorded a demo at the Picket, which was a legendary and sadly now closed venue in Liverpool. And as this demo got out and started to make the rounds, record companies started to take an interest. Record company A&R scouts started coming up to Liverpool from London and packing out the gigs. One night the band played to a completely full house at the Everyman in Liverpool, and it was there they met Andy MacDonald, owner of Go Discs. He was blown away by the band and he offered them a record contract. Mavers and the band signed, and they all relocated to Hammersmith in London to begin work recording. But unfortunately, things didn't get off to a great start. Lee Mavers said this: "We were all on top of each other, and the neighbours complained about the noise all the time. You couldn't pick up a guitar without the police coming round 10 minutes later. There were other bands rehearsing as well, and you couldn't get any peace." Paul Hemmings was one of the ever-changing backing band lineup, and he describes recording this way: "With the recording, it wasn't really happening. It's hard when you're repeatedly trying to capture something in the studio that had a great degree of spontaneity to it, and that was quite frustrating for Lee. You went into studios and just didn't capture it. You didn't get the same sound. After the London recording sessions finished, we were still playing the same set, and it was starting to wear on everyone. We went to a studio in Coventry for a while, then that was all scrapped. We went somewhere else, and that was scrapped too. It just became so disillusioning when everything you did was scrapped. Often, as the sessions were starting, Lee was saying, 'This sounds great.' And by the end, he was saying, 'This sounds shit, forget it.' It just got to the point where I was sick of it. fed up with it and really burned out. I kept thinking, how long can you keep doing this for? And seemingly at this point, Lee Mavers started down the same route as many temperamental artists before him, down the studio rabbit hole, never to return. The way he listened to music seemed to change. He no longer seemed to be able to separate how he felt in that moment from the actual sound that was coming out of the speakers. In 1988, Lee Mavers gave this interview to Phase One. "We've already got a sound, but we're trying to get it to come back through the studio speakers. Modern studios and us don't mix, chalk and cheese." Then John Power adds, "We've been through all the main studios in the industry that you can name, all the big ones, and we've had all the producers that are supposed to be good, and it hasn't sounded too good." As the endless recording sessions continued, the next musician to come through the Lars revolving door was John Byrne on lead guitar. And it's his playing that you can hear in the most famous moment of any Lars song, the opening guitar riff from There She Goes. And with him, John Byrne brought future Oasis drummer Chris Sharrock.
Chris from the Icicle Works has joined the band. Why did he decide to do that?
Ask him.
Do you know why though? I mean,
Well, he's into it, like.
Well, he knows a good thing when he sees one.
And like that, we need, you know, it's funny, like, because we needed a drummer, and and all of a sudden, we had a lot of drummers, didn't we? Like, who couldn't really cut it, like, basically. And, you know, he just popped up, and, you know, he's into it, like. And it's a big change in drumming for him. He's used to be doing big rolls, isn't he? Like, you know, like, every 5 seconds or whatever. Now he's, you know,
This is more
he's
simple,
changed, like,
more
he wants
roots,
to learn, he's learning Lars music now, like. Oh, he's into playing nice beats and little things and, you know, complimenting the song. You know what I mean?
John Byrne says this about the recordings. "We started recording at Woodcray Studios in Wokingham, and I think Lee drove the engineers mad. He'd have them set the recording gear up in trees, in the courtyard, the hallway. I remember one session where Lee got them to close mic the inside of a Steinway grand piano. He wanted to sing into the piano to try to get the reverberation of the strings. If you listen really carefully, at some points you can hear Mavers using a matchbox to strum his guitar. The rustle of the matches gave him that extra feel. Tuning's another thing as well. He was so obsessed with tuning the guitar to get it exactly right. I was always suggesting that he use a tuner, but he keeps experimenting and trying different things." John Power too had his concerns, saying this: "When we started going into the studio, I was a bit suspicious because Lee wanted to do all the recording in the kitchen. He was saying things like, 'Don't dust the guitars, they sound better with the dust on them.' And I realised that all was not right." In a 1999 interview with Q magazine, producer John Leckie, who had also worked with the Stone Roses, said this about his time working with the Lars. "Lee was inclined to talk in a kind of Scouse psychobabble. He'd spend half an hour describing the way he'd want the guitar to sound, things like wanting to capture the sound of the tree it was made from, or he'd decide he didn't like a particular cable because it was yellow." John Byrne says they recorded at least 6 or 7 complete versions of There She Goes before Lee was happy to release it as a single. Byrne left the band shortly afterwards to go to music college and become a guitar teacher, and next through the revolving door was Barry Sutton.
Well done, well done. That's Barry and Chris sitting down, and I've got John and Lee with me here.
Sutton said Lee wasn't happy with the mix or the sound. He was cursed, in my view, by his own high standards. We weren't ever going to get the sound he wanted. And so, There She Goes was released as a single. It was the second single after the song Way Out, both of which failed to chart. And the single version of There She Goes was the last piece of music by the Lars to ever be released with the band's consent. After the release of Way Out and There She Goes as singles, the band turned to focus on the album. They started recording at a studio in Liverpool called The Attic, but Mavers wasn't happy, so sessions ground to a halt. They then tried again at the Pink Museum studio, which is still open today, now called the Motor Museum Studio, the Lars stayed at the Pink Museum recording for 3 months, and in that time they fully recorded every song on the album. However, at the end of this session, Lee Mavers wasn't happy with the sound and everything was scrapped. And, quite understandably, at this point the relationship between the band and their label started to go sour. Andy McDonald, owner of Go Discs, came to talk to them in person because they had now been on the label for 2 years, being paid a wage, and they had recorded over and over and over at studio after studio, and in that time they had only produced 2 singles. Making matters worse, in that meeting Andy asked them to lay off the drugs, and one of them sparked up a spliff in front of him, sparking a massive row. After the dust settled, their quite kind and long-suffering label hunted down an original Abbey Road Studio 2 mixing desk. Andy McDonald, owner of the label, set it up for them at his own parents' house in Devon, and they all moved down there with producer Mike Hedges to start recording a second time. Suddenly, on this second session in Devon with Mike Hedges, everything began to fall into place. Guitarist Barry Sutton said it was the best and easiest session they ever did, and John Power agreed. In Q magazine, John Power said this: "The best recordings we did were with Mike Hedges because he'd got an old Abbey Road Studio 2 desk. The version of the album done on that was amazing. Lee was kissing everyone going, 'That's it, we've done it.' And it did seem like that, so we were all really relieved." And yet, after the album was completed to everyone's satisfaction, most notably including that of Lee Mavers, John Power and Chris Sharrock decided to go away on holiday together, and they decided not to invite Lee.
Come round here and have one for Chris on drums. Pick a card, any card, what you got?
Where did you go on holiday last year? I didn't go on holiday.
Wasn't it the studio?
Yeah, we went to a studio.
Working hard.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, right, fair enough.
And as a result of that holiday, Lee rejected all the recordings, basically out of spite and self-pity. He even pretty much admitted as much in this interview. Mavers said this: "I bumped into a mate of John's and he said that John and Chris had just gone off on holiday, and I just got really unhappy, so I said no to the recordings. I felt like I had to assert myself." Producer Mike Hedges explained Lee Mavers' behaviour like this: "The Lars leader was entering a drug-induced psychosis. He'd either be really on it or the opposite. I can't really say what drugs were involved, but let's say he had ups and downs." So, once again, we see Lee Mavers deciding whether songs are good or not based on how they made him feel. He was completely happy with the sessions until he discovered that Powers and Sharrock had gone on holiday without him. And from that point, he had bad feelings about the sessions, so he rejected them. It was nothing to do with the sound coming out with the speakers, it was all about himself. After Lee rejected the Devon sessions, the label had had enough. They cut the band off financially and stopped paying their wages, and at that point, Chris Sharrock, who had a family and who had kids, had to leave. Despite having previously been completely happy with all the recordings, after the holiday, Lee Mavers said this: "I don't think I ever got Chris Sharrock to play anything right in the whole time he was in the band. Honest to God, not one of them songs has been done justice to." And Chris Sharrock talked about those sessions this way: "The atmosphere Lee creates isn't conducive to people doing their best work. There's a lot of attention paid to the exact phrasing of parts, strange guitar tunings, a lot of pressure. My playing was suffering. I was deeply paranoid all the time. When I left, it came as a relief." After the Devon sessions, when the wages were cut off, Barry Sutton left as well, and once again the Lars were reduced to just the 2 key members, Lee Mavers and John Power. The next band members to join were Peter Camel on guitar and Neil Mavers, Lee's younger brother, on drums. But when they joined, they were under no illusions about how backwards and bizarre the band had become. Peter says, "When we joined, things weren't right. We loved the Lars in the early days with Mike Badger, but now things were going wrong. It was all about helping Lee to get the right sound. Go Discs told the band they could go into the studio one last time with producer Steve Lillywhite, and this was their last chance. Whatever happened, it was going to be put out as the album, no matter what.
The Lars have battled with modern recording techniques over the last 3 years, trying to capture their authentic garage sound.
According to Neil Mavers, however, at Lee's instigation, the band actually decided ahead of time to intentionally not play at their best in the hopes that the label would actually back down and not put it out. That being said, the third album sessions went quite well initially. That is until Lee discovered that the producer had been sent a dossier entitled A Producer's Guide to Dealing with Lee Mavers, in which they were given advice on how to manage what was fast becoming a musical madman. Lee says this: "The last straw was that someone found a dossier on me that had been prepared. I couldn't believe it. I was saying, to fuck with this. They rang us up after we walked out saying, 'Are you coming to mix this or not?' And I said, 'You can't polish a turd.'" And so, having spent allegedly around £1 million recording this album, the label mixed it without any assistance from the band, who refused to help, and put it out against the band's wishes.
I don't know if I should bring his name up. It's Steve Lillywhite. You were working with him on the record.
No, I've never met the guy.
But what's interesting is I did meet him. I thought he was a really great producer at one time. Now, I don't know how great he is anymore. But what intrigued me was the fact that you said that he had a specific method of working.
That he sticks to,
But I'm just curious, but what is that method that you guys...
That's his method.
Yeah, what's his method of
Well, I mean,
making
it's not our method, put it that way, you know what I'm saying?
Well, that's fine.
It's very, like, poppy and simple-mindy.
Obviously.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And we're a bit more rootsy, I think.
So you wanted to add a lot of special effects and...
No, it's not that. It's just that, where we're coming from is different from where he's coming from, like, and where we're heading is different. You know what I mean? And that's all. That's just, nothing personal. That's just the way it is. Like,
right.
That's life.
But is it the use of technology that is different, or just the understanding of the songs?
The understanding of what they are, what it is that they're capturing, basically.
The album was received with high praise. In 1991, Eric Clapton said it was the only thing he'd liked in the last couple of years. However, the band themselves began to actively attack and sabotage both the album and their label at every opportunity in the press.
Though lead singer and songwriter Lee Mavers and bass guitarist John Power have been fronting various lineups of the Lars since 1986, it was only last year that their record company, Go Disc, finally released their first album, simply called The Lars. Unfortunately, the band don't like that either.
Terrible. Like, for instance, they weren't like the proper performances. They were just like, we were messing around in the studio, fiddling around with sounds and not happy, playing tongue-in-cheek. And that's the state that all the recording was up to by the time we left. We jibbed it at about 3 months into it, like, because it was still no better since day one. And somehow, they've even got voices where there wasn't voices and mixed that up as well. So, but still, like, I am embarrassed about it singing. It's terrible, like, you know what I mean? It's a croak.
They asked their fans not to listen to the album, not to buy the album. They said they hated it and that it was terrible. This is some of Mavers' confusing explanation as to why he doesn't like the album. Music is symmetrical, all symmetrical, and that album isn't. You can hear each instrument straining, but in the end there's nothing there. You can't hear it, but that will be put right. The universe, what is life? All the early creation stories begin with, at first there was a sound, and that's dead right. Look into a grain of wood and it's all one line. A big twisting circle where everything changes. But as things take a turn for the worst, so they will turn back in the end.
If you think about it really, what we're doing is capturing something from a different dimension and harnessing it in a material net. And we've got to do that right, you know what I mean? To keep it in its purest form. don't dilute it, don't try and twist it for your own ends. It's like, you know, when you write a song, you don't like write it from yourself, you capture it as an aerial again, a medium.
Mavers got increasingly bitter about the album as time went by, constantly looking for anyone else to blame. In an interview that appeared in Q magazine in December 1990, he said, "I don't know why we didn't get our sound. 7 different studios at about £1,000 a day. It's not our fault. It's up to the sound engineers to capture it, the so-called producers."
In early 1987, the La's were tipped as the new Smiths. 3 years of back-breaking work has only resulted in a few singles and an album which the La's hate. Lee Mavers is understandably frustrated with their slow progress.
It's not just about playing music, that's what we thought it would be like, you know, just as simple as playing music and just recording dead simple, you know, the way we had done in the past. But there's more to it, there's more business, more red tape, more kooks spoiling the broth, being told what to do, you've got to do it a certain way or it doesn't go, and a lot of upset, and you've got to learn how to deal with that.
As the La's continued, bass player and backing vocalist John Power was now developing into quite an accomplished songwriter in his own right. Some of John Power's songs were included in the La's live set, with John Power on lead vocals, in an arrangement reminiscent of the original setup with Mike Badger.
How do you guys write songs?
Easily.
Easily?
There's no set format.
You write them together?
We have. We do write together and we write apart.
How are the songs different when you write them apart?
I sing them and he sings them. Yeah. He wrote the one that he writes and I write the one and that's the difference.
Sing?
Like.
You sing the song that you write and you sing the songs you write?
Of course.
However, perhaps unsurprisingly, Lee Mavers became increasingly unhappy with this arrangement, not really wanting to share the frontman role with John Power and refusing to sing backing vocals on his songs live, even though John always sang them on his. They played live at what was then the Town and Country Club in London on November the 18th, 1990, and Lee once again refused to sing backing vocals during Power's song Follow Me Down. So, while he was singing, John Power changed one of the lines to "Won't you sing the backing vocals?" The song ended abruptly and the two of them had a massive row on stage in front of the crowd. Discussing the incident, John Power said, "We just started and second song in, it was guitars down and head to head between me and Lee. If you're not going to sing on my song, I'm not going to sing on your fucking song." We'd put a new song of mine into the set and he decided, because it was my song, he wasn't going to sing. So I started shouting at him and we stopped and it all went off. And so, despite his many years of very, very patient commitment to the band, Lee Mavers, at last, began to also turn on his most loyal comrade. And so, John Power realised he could no longer tolerate Lee's behaviour and began thinking about what might be next for him after the La's. One of John Power's final appearances with the La's was on the David Letterman show in the States, and it was just him and Lee and the studio musicians from the show.
Our next guests have made what is one of the most widely praised debut albums in years. It's right here, and it's named after the group themselves. It's called The La's. Now, kids making their American TV debut, please welcome The La's.
Shortly after this, John Power sent a message via the record label's A&R men to Lee Mavers to let him know that he was out. John Power was no longer in the La's. Power said this: "I was just feeling uninspired. I left to do my own stuff. We'd come back from Japan and America and I just wanted to put some new songs in the set. I've been playing the same fucking songs for 6.5 years and I said to myself, I am not playing them again. I had 3 new songs which I thought were good, but I felt that if I didn't try, no one would ever know, and I'd just be fucking bitter for the rest of my life." Power went on to form the massively successful band Cast, and many people, Lee Mavers included, have interpreted the lyrics of their first single as a direct message from Power to him. Mavers said this, quoting from the song All Right: If someone said to you, "Do you think I'd miss you? Do you think I'd care? Do you think I'd lay down and die? You never even tried." And then, if you lose your mind, then you lose your mind. I mean, how would you feel? Now, the really interesting thing there is that Lee got the words wrong. John Power doesn't say, "If you lose your mind, you lose your mind." It was a kind of a Freudian slip on the part of Lee. I think, deep down, he kind of knew that his behaviour had been absolutely crackers. John Power said, "I don't really give a shit what Lee thinks. I just stopped worrying about what he thought when I left the fucking band. I couldn't be arsed spending 8 years in the studio and then scrapping it. The Lars are the past, and they were only important to a little group of scallies. Cast mean a lot more to me." It's a very interesting, possibly not a coincidence, that the last line that's repeatedly sung by Lee Mavers at the end of the Lars debut album is this. After John Power left, the remaining 3 members of the Lars got even more heavily into hard drugs. James Joyce came into the band to replace John Power, and he describes rehearsals after the departure of Power like this. Tension, definitely. There was a lot of repetition. Lee would drive you through the same songs again and again at the rehearsals, the same set in the same order. You'd end up feeling that you were a shit musician and people were really paranoid about being sacked from the band. Mad things, honest to God. I remember one time that he was getting us to tune to feedback coming from the amps. Tuning to feedback. You could see that he was inspired, but his mind was going elsewhere.
Yeah. And because Lee was so nuts, I suppose, it makes the whole thing more intriguing, doesn't it? Is it you telling me that he would tune his guitar to a fridge? Is that
well?
true?
We have yeah, but it's the hum. You know,
right.
we have tuned our guitars. You know, in the Lars on many occasions we've tuned to the hum of electricity and things like that.
As Lee Mavers continued to spiral downwards, he particularly vented his anger on Neil, his younger brother. They apparently had a huge punch-up in the rehearsal room after Lee had repeatedly verbally abused his brother, and they didn't speak again for months. James Joyce says, "It was the same few songs, again and again. He was working on new songs all the time, but he wouldn't let the band do them. We'd say, 'Come on, let's do something different, some new stuff. Let's have the new songs.' And Lee would say no. It got to the stage where it was just drugs, and then whatever else you could manage to fit around that, which wasn't much. Lee has this tape of music that was just 4 chords being played and looped and repeated over and over for the whole side of a cassette. He would just listen and listen to that for days. It drove you mad." Carl, another temporary band member, puts it this way: "Nothing is straightforward with Lee. He seems to make life difficult for himself. He won't stand for no mistakes, none. I don't really know what it is he's after, to be honest." Sean, yet another temporary band member, says this: "The thing is, if you don't get what Lee's saying, then there's no point. You could be the best guitarist in the world, but unless you can think like he wants you to think, forget it." Eventually, everyone left the band, leaving Lee Mavers alone. He lived off the royalties from the song There She Goes, raised a family, and basically withdrew from the music industry completely, making music for his ears only, hidden away in a secret shed somewhere in Liverpool. From time to time in the intervening years, the band would briefly resurface, with Lee and another group of 3 backing musicians appearing for a couple of gigs, playing the same songs, and disappearing once more. Sadly, it is true that the Lars never became what they might have been. They never fulfilled their true potential. I don't think we'll ever know why that is, but one thing I am sure of: Lee Mavers and the band were wrong about this album. It is an absolute classic that has stood the test of time, inspired countless musicians, and now become something truly timeless.